The fire roared, licking the edges of the $38 million check as Lila's mother, Diane, held it over the flames. "This money is poison," she hissed, her voice trembling with a fury Lila had never seen. By morning, the ashes of her grandfather's will were scattered across their Brooklyn backyard. And with them, Lila's chance at a life free from struggle gone. Lila Carter stood frozen, her breath catching in the crisp October air. At 28, she'd spent years clawing her way through New York's cutthroat art world, piecing together a living from freelance illustration gigs and late-night waitressing shifts. The inheritance, her grandfather's fortune, left solely to her, had been her ticket out. A chance to open her own studio, to breathe, to live without the constant weight of bills and broken dreams. But Diane, her devoutly traditional mother, saw the money as a curse, a symbol of her estranged father's manipulative legacy. "He abandoned us," Diane had said, tears streaking her face as the check burned. "His wealth won't define you." Lila's heart pounded with a mix of betrayal and despair. She loved her mother, but this act felt like a theft not just of money but of hope. She stormed out, her sneakers crunching against the pavement, her mind racing. She needed air, space, anything to dull the ache. That's when she saw her Emery Quinn, leaning against a lamppost outside the corner bodega, her black leather jacket catching the morning light. Emery was 30, a photographer with a reputation for capturing raw, unfiltered moments in New York's underbelly. Her short, tousled black hair framed a face that was all sharp angles and piercing blue eyes, like she could see through you and still choose to stay. Lila had met her a month ago at a gallery opening, where Emery's photos, gritty, soulful shots of subway strangers and late-night diners, had left Lila speechless. They'd talked for hours that night, their conversation weaving effortlessly from art to dreams to the quiet fears they both hid. Lila felt a spark then, something she hadn't dared name. Now, seeing Emery's familiar silhouette, that spark flared again. "You look like you just lost a fight with the universe," Emery said, her voice low and teasing as she pushed off the lamppost. She flicked her cigarette to the ground, crushing it under her boot. "Wanna talk about it?" Lila hesitated, her throat tight. She wasn't one to spill her guts to near strangers, but Emery's gaze was steady, unguarded, like she'd catch whatever Lila threw her way. "My mom just burned my inheritance," Lila blurted, the words tasting bitter. $38 million. Up in flames. Emery's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "Damn. That's cinematic." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "You okay?" Lila laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Not even close." She looked at Emery, at the way her jaw tightened with quiet empathy, and something in Lila cracked open. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now, but Emery's presence felt like a lifeline. I don't know what to do now. That money was everything." Emery tilted her head, studying Lila with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Maybe it wasn't," she said quietly. "Maybe the real stuff, the stuff that matters, isn't in a check." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Lila couldn't yet grasp. They walked together, aimless at first, through the streets of Brooklyn. The city hummed around them, taxis honking, leaves skittering across sidewalks, but Lila felt anchored by Emery's quiet strength. They ended up at a small coffee shop, tucked into a corner booth, where Lila poured out the story. Her grandfather's cold distance, her mother's fierce rejection of his wealth, and the dreams Lila had pinned on that check. Emery listened, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, her eyes never leaving Lila's face. "Your mom sounds like she's trying to protect you," Emery said at last, her voice careful but firm. "But she's wrong about one thing. You don't need that money to be who you're meant to be." She leaned forward, her hand brushing Lila's on the table, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through Lila's veins. "You're already enough." Lila's breath caught. She'd spent so long fighting to prove herself to her mother, to the art world, to herself, that Emery's words felt like a revelation. But doubt crept in, cold and familiar. "You don't get it," Lila said, pulling her hand back. "That money was my way out. Without it, I'm stuck. I'm nothing." Emery's eyes darkened, not with anger but with something fiercer, conviction. "You're not nothing, Lila. You're fire. I've seen your sketches, the way you see the world. You've got something most people spend their lives chasing." She paused, her voice dropping. "And I'm not just saying that because I like looking at you." Lila's cheeks burned, her heart hammering. Was Emery flirting? Or was this just her way, bold, unfiltered, cutting through Lila's defenses like they were paper? Before she could respond, Emery stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "Come with me," she said, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "I want to show you something." Against her better judgment, Lila followed. They took the subway to Manhattan, the train rattling through tunnels as Emery told stories of her own fractured past growing up in foster care, finding solace in her camera, building a life on her own terms. Lila listened, captivated, feeling the walls she'd built around herself start to crumble. Emery wasn't just magnetic. She was real, raw, a force Lila couldn't resist. They ended up at an abandoned warehouse in Chelsea, its walls covered in vibrant street art. Emery led her inside, where a single photograph hung on a makeshift wall. Lila's face, captured at the gallery opening, her eyes bright with passion as she talked about her work. "I took this that night," Emery said, her voice soft but steady. "This is who you are, Lila. Not some check. Not your mom's fears. This." Lila stared at the photo, her throat tight with emotion. In Emery's lens, she wasn't the struggling artist or the daughter of a broken family. She was radiant, alive, powerful. For the first time she saw herself the way Emery did, and it changed everything. As they stood in the dim light of the warehouse, their shoulders brushing, Lila felt a pull she couldn't ignore. Emery's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, and for a moment the world fell away. It was just them, two hearts colliding in a city that never stopped moving. But Lila's mind raced with questions. Could she trust this feeling? Could she trust Emery? And how could she move forward when her future had just gone up in flames? The city pulsed around Lila and Emery as they left the warehouse, the night air sharp with the promise of change. Lila's hand still tingled from Emery's touch, her heart caught between fear and a reckless hope she hadn't felt in years. But the weight of her mother's betrayal clung to her, a shadow she couldn't outrun. Over the next week, Lila threw herself into her work, sketching with a fury that bordered on obsession. Her tiny apartment, cluttered with canvases and coffee mugs, became a refuge from the chaos of her thoughts. Emery texted her daily small thoughtful messages that made Lila's pulse quicken. A photo of a sunset over the Hudson, a line from a poem, a simple "you good," that felt like a lifeline. But Lila kept her distance, unsure if she could handle the intensity of what was growing between them. One evening, Emery showed up at Lila's door, unannounced, a camera slung around her neck and a determined glint in her eyes. "You're avoiding me," she said, leaning against the doorframe, her voice teasing but edged with concern. "Thought I'd make it harder for you to hide." Lila's heart skipped, but she stepped aside, letting Emery in. The apartment felt smaller with her there, her presence filling every corner. They sat on the couch, a bottle of cheap wine between them, and talked until the city outside grew quiet. Emery spoke of her dreams to exhibit her photos in a real gallery, to capture stories that mattered. Lila shared her own, a studio where she could teach kids to draw, to give them the freedom she'd always craved. Their words wove together, building a fragile bridge between their worlds. But the conversation turned to Diane, and Lila's walls went up. "She thinks she's saving me," Lila said, her voice tight. "But she's trapped me. That money could have changed everything, my life. Now I'm back to square one." Emery leaned closer, her eyes searching Lila's. "Maybe square one isn't so bad," she said. "Maybe it's where you find out who you really are." Her hand brushed Lila's knee, a gentle anchor in the storm of Lila's emotions. "You don't need millions to make something beautiful." Lila wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at her. She pulled away, standing to pace the room. "You don't get it, Emery. You've built your life from nothing. I'm not that strong. I'm tired of scraping by, of feeling like I'm failing every mom myself." Her voice broke, and she hated how vulnerable she sounded. Emery stood, closing the distance between them. "You're not failing," she said fiercely. "You're fighting. That's strength. And you're not alone in this, Lila. Not anymore." Her hands cupped Lila's face, her touch warm and steady, and for a moment, Lila let herself lean into it. Their lips were inches apart, the air between them electric, but Lila pulled back, her heart racing with fear. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not now. Not when everything's falling apart." Emery's face softened, but she didn't push. "Okay," she said simply. But I'm not going anywhere. She left Lila standing in the quiet of her apartment, the echo of her words lingering like a promise. The next day, Lila found a letter slipped under her Duran old, yellowed envelope with her grandfather's handwriting. Her mother had kept it hidden, only now choosing to share it. Inside was a note, brief but heavy. Lila, my wealth was never my legacy. Find what matters. Live bravely. The words hit her like a punch, stirring a mix of anger and curiosity. What had her grandfather meant? And why had Diane hidden this? Lila confronted her mother that evening in their cramped Brooklyn kitchen. Diane's face was drawn, her eyes red from sleepless nights. I burned the check to protect you, Diane said, her voice cracking. Your grandfather was a cruel man. He controlled everyone with his money, drove wedges between us. I didn't want that for you. But you took my choice away, Lila shot back, her voice shaking. You decided for me just like he did. How is that different? Diane had no answer, only tears, and Lila left, her heart a tangled mess of hurt and love. She called Emery, her voice raw. Can I see you? She asked, and Emery was there within the hour, meeting her at a quiet park under a sky streaked with stars. They sat on a bench, shoulders touching, and Lila told her about the letter, the fight, the confusion tearing her apart. Emery listened, her silence a steady presence, and when Lila finished, Emery took her hand. You're not your mom's mistakes, Emery said softly, or your grandfather's. You're you, Lila. And that's enough. Her thumb traced circles on Lila's palm, grounding her, and for the first time Lila didn't pull away. She leaned in, their foreheads touching, and let herself feel the warmth of Emery's breath, the quiet strength of her presence. But the moment was fleeting. Lila's phone buzzed, a text from her mother. There's more to the will. Come home. Her stomach twisted. What else had Diane kept from her? And could she face it without losing herself or Emery in the process? Lila's heart pounded as she stood outside her mother's brownstone, the weight of the unknown pressing against her chest. The text had been cryptic, urgent, and now with Emery by her side, she felt both fortified and exposed. Emery's hand brushed hers, a quiet reminder of her presence, but Lila's mind was a storm of questions about her grandfather's will and what Diane had hidden. Inside, Diane sat at the kitchen table, a small wooden box in front of her. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling as she pushed the box toward Lila. This was your grandfather's, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want you to have it. I thought I was protecting you. But I was wrong. Lila opened the box, her fingers shaking. Inside was a key, old and tarnished, and a folded letter addressed to her. She unfolded it, her breath catching as she read her grandfather's words. The money was a test, Lila. The real inheritance is at the address on the key. Find it. Live your truth. An address in upstate New York was scrawled at the bottom, along with a single line. Forgive me. Lila's mind reeled. A test? What did that mean? And why had her grandfather, a man she barely knew, left her this cryptic puzzle? She looked at Diane, anger flaring. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded. You burned the check. Hid this. How much else are you keeping from me? Diane's face crumpled. I thought I was saving you from him, she said. Your grandfather disowned me when I married your father, said I was a disgrace. His money came with strings, Lila. I didn't want you tied to them. Her voice broke, and for the first time, Lila saw not just her mother's stubbornness but her pain, the scars of a daughter rejected by her own father. Emery's hand found Lila's under the table, a steady anchor. Maybe it's time to find out what he meant, Emery said, her voice calm but firm. Let's go. Together. The next morning they rented a car and drove north, the city fading into rolling hills and quiet towns. The drive was tense, Lila's mind caught between her mother's betrayal and the mystery of her grandfather's words. Emery filled the silence with stories, funny ones about her foster home pranks, quiet ones about the loneliness she'd carried. Lila listened, her heart softening, and by the time they reached the address, a small, weathered cabin by a lake, she felt a flicker of hope. The key fit the cabin's lock perfectly. Inside, the air was musty, the walls lined with old books and faded photographs. Lila's breath caught as she recognized her grandfather, an only younger man, smiling beside a woman who wasn't her grandmother. The woman's face was kind, her eyes bright, And in another photo they held hands, their love unmistakable. Emery picked up a journal from a shelf, its pages yellowed. "Lila, look at this," she said, her voice soft. The journal was her grandfather's, filled with entries about his life, his regrets and his love for a woman named Clara, a painter he'd met in his youth. "My family forbade it," he wrote. "I let her go to keep the peace, and I've regretted it every day. Lila, don't make my mistake. Live for love, not duty." Lila's eyes burned with tears. Her grandfather hadn't just left her a fortune. He'd left her a lesson, one he'd learned too late. She thought of her mother, of the pain passed down through generations, and of herself standing at a crossroads. She looked at Emery, who was watching her with quiet intensity, and felt a surge of clarity. The Isher connection with Emery wasn't just a spark. It was real, raw, and worth fighting for. They spent the day in the cabin, reading the journal, piecing together her grandfather's story. As the sun set over the lake, casting golden light through the windows, Emery took Lila's hand. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Lila nodded, her throat tight. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said. "He wanted me to choose my own path, not his money or my mom's fears." She paused, her eyes meeting Emery's. "And I think I'm choosing you." Emery's breath hitched, and before Lila could second-guess herself, Emery leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft, fierce, and full of promise. The world fell away, leaving only the warmth of Emery's touch, the steady beat of her heart against Lila's. For the first time, Lila felt free not from struggle, but from the weight of others' expectations. But the moment was shattered by a phone call from Diane. "Lila, you need to come back," she said, her voice panicked. "There's a lawyer here. About the will. There's something else you don't know." Lila's stomach dropped. What more could there be? And would it tear her apart or bring her closer to the life she was just beginning to claim? The drive back to Brooklyn was a blur, the highway stretching endlessly as Lila gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing. Emery sat beside her, quiet but steady, her hand resting on Lila's thigh like an anchor. The lawyer's visit, Diane's cryptic warning, it all felt like a storm brewing, threatening the fragile peace Lila had found at the cabin. They arrived at Diane's brownstone at dusk, the sky bruised with purple clouds. Inside, a woman in a sharp blazer sat at the kitchen table, her briefcase open, papers spread out. Diane stood by the sink, her face pale, her hands twisting a dish towel. "Lila," she said, her voice trembling. "This is Miss Harper, your grandfather's lawyer." Miss Harper stood, offering a firm handshake. "Your grandfather's will had a second clause," she said, her tone clipped but kind. "The $38 million was only part of it. There's a trust fund smaller, $2 million set aside for you, but only if you meet certain conditions." She slid a document across the table, and Lila's heart sank as she read the words. "To claim the trust, Lila Carter must marry a man of good standing within 1 year of my death." Lila's breath caught, the room spinning. Emery's hand tightened on hers, but Lila couldn't look at her. The words were a slap, a final twist of her grandfather's control, even from the grave. Marry a man? It was a condition rooted in a world that didn't know her, didn't see her, didn't understand the love she was only beginning to embrace. "That's why I burned the check," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I knew about the conditions. I thought if I destroyed the money, you'd be free of him. But I didn't know about the trust." Her eyes pleaded for forgiveness, but Lila felt only rage. "You knew." Lila's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "You knew he was trying to control me, and you still hid it? How could you?" She stood, her chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out, Emery following close behind. Outside, the air was cold, biting at Lila's skin. She paced the sidewalk, her heart a tangle of hurt and defiance. Emery caught her arm, pulling her close. "Talk to me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in Lila's eyes. "Don't shut me out." Lila's voice shook as she spoke. "He wanted to force me into a life I don't want. And my mom, she thought she was protecting me. But she's just as bad, keeping secrets, making choices for me." She looked at Emery, tears spilling over. "I'm so tired of fighting everyone else's battles. I just want to be me." Emery's arms wrapped around her, strong and warm. "Then be you," she whispered. "Not his version, not your mom's. Yours." She pulled back, her eyes fierce. And if that trust fund comes with strings, screw it. You don't need it. Lila wanted to believe her, but the weight of the will, her mother's choices, and her own fears pressed down on her. She thought of the cabin, her grandfather's journal, his plea to live for love. Could she do that? Could she choose Emery, choose herself, without the safety of money or approval? Over the next few days, Lila and Emery grew closer, their bond a quiet rebellion against the world's expectations. They spent evenings in Emery's loft, surrounded by her photographs, where Lila sketched while Emery edited her latest shots. One night, as rain pattered against the windows, Emery showed Lila a photo she'd taken at the cabin Lila by the lake, her face soft with wonder. "This is you," Emery said, her voice low. "This is what I see." Lila's heart swelled and she kissed Emery slow and deep, letting herself fall into the moment. It was a choice, a defiance, a step toward the life she wanted. But the trust fund loomed, a reminder of the world's demands. Lila knew she had to confront it, not just for herself, but for the future she was beginning to imagine with Emery. She met Ms. Harper again, this time alone at a quiet cafe. "Can I refuse the trust?" Lila asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Ms. Harper nodded, explaining that rejecting the trust would mean forfeiting the money, but also the conditions. Lila felt a weight lift, but also a pang of loss, not for the money, but for the closure she'd hoped to find. That night she told Emery everything, her words spilling out in a rush. "I'm done letting him control me," she said, her voice fierce. "I don't want his money if it means giving up who I am." Emery's smile was radiant, and she pulled Lila into a kiss that felt like a promise of forever. But as they lay together, tangled in Emery's sheets, Lila's phone buzzed with another message from Diane. "There's one more thing you need to know about your grandfather. Please come home." Lila's heart sank. What else could there be? And would it shatter the fragile happiness she'd found with Emery? Lila stood in her mother's kitchen once more, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Emery was there, her presence a quiet strength, but Lila's focus was on Diane, who clutched a small leather-bound book. "This was your grandfather's," Diane said, her voice trembling. "I found it after you left. I think it's what he wanted you to have all along." Lila took the book, her hands unsteady. It was another journal, older than the one at the cabin, its pages filled with her grandfather's tight, careful script. The entries told a story she hadn't expected. His love for Clara wasn't just a fleeting romance. They'd planned to marry, to build a life together. But his family's disapproval, rooted in Clara's lower social class, and their own rigid beliefs, forced him to choose duty over love. He'd regretted it every day, the journal revealed, and when he learned years later that Clara was a lesbian, living happily with her partner, he saw his mistake in stark clarity. "I failed her," he wrote, "and I failed myself. Lila, don't let the world's rules steal your heart." Lila's eyes filled with tears, the words blurring on the page. Her grandfather hadn't just left her a puzzle. He'd left her his truth, a plea to live differently. The trust fund's condition, marrying a man, wasn't cruelty. It was a test he'd hoped she'd reject, a way to push her toward the courage he'd lacked. She looked at Diane, who was crying now too. "I didn't know," Diane said. "I thought he was ashamed of me, of you. I was wrong." Lila's anger softened, replaced by a deep, aching understanding. Her mother had burned the check out of love, misguided but real, trying to shield her from a legacy of control. Lila crossed the room, pulling Diane into a hug. "I forgive you," she whispered, and Diane sobbed, her arms tightening around her daughter. Emery watched, her eyes soft with pride, and Lila felt a surge of gratitude. This woman, with her fierce heart and unflinching honesty, had shown her what it meant to choose love over fear. Lila knew now what she had to do, not just for herself, but for the family she was rebuilding, and the future she wanted with Emery. The next week, Lila formally rejected the trust fund, signing the papers with a steady hand. The $2 million was gone, but she felt lighter, freer than she ever had. She and Emery moved forward together, their bond deepening with every shared moment. Lila poured her heart into her art, her sketches now vibrant with the colors of her newfound courage. Emery's photos, too, took on a new depth, capturing the beauty of their love in stolen glances and quiet touches. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, leaves crunching underfoot, Lila stopped, turning to Emery. I used to think that check was my future, she said, her voice steady. But it's you. It's us. Emery's eyes shone and she kissed Lila, slow and deep, under a canopy of golden trees. They didn't have millions, but they had each other. Lila opened a small art studio with her savings, teaching kids from the neighborhood to draw, to dream. Emery's photos were picked up by a gallery, her work gaining the recognition she'd always chased. And Diane, slowly healing, became a quiet supporter, attending their exhibitions, learning to embrace the daughter she'd almost lost. As winter settled over New York, Lila found a final entry in her grandfather's journal, tucked at the back. Love is the only inheritance that matters. Lila, I hope you find it. She closed the book, her heart full. She had found it not in a check or a trust fund, but in Emery's laugh, in her mother's tentative smile, in the life she was building on her own terms. Lila and Emery stood together on their apartment's fire escape, the city sprawling below them, alive with possibility. What's next? Emery asked, her arm around Lila's waist. Lila smiled, leaning into her. Everything, she said. And for the first time she believed it. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.